Arizona. I went to Keith Elliott, and I lived here in the county basically my whole life. I work part-time with Garden now, helping out with recreation things, particularly here in North Carolina, along the rivers, trails. Um, as I said, I've lived in this county most of my whole life. I've been on the rivers since I was probably 13, 14 years old. Um, Flat bottom boat, raft, whatever. Um, really excited to be able to speak about this. I think the rivers is one of the great assets that this county has. It's Rockingham County, this whole region, whole Dan River Basin, and it's a huge asset. You know, many people live in places that could die out of river state. We have six, you know, in the immediate area around here. So, really looking forward to this, and that's what it is about me. Anything else on?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I'll drop it in the chat too, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll answer them at the end, just so that Keith has one thing to focus on. So we appreciate y'all being here today.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started here. So, as we said, this is about planning a river trip. While there's many different types of rivers, I'm pretty much going to focus this on the rivers here in our region, the dams at the Mayo. So most of the examples I'm going to talk about today, as far as what to expect on these rivers, is dealing with those particular rivers. But any trip that you're going to go on, there's certain things that you're going to want to do, regardless of where you're going. So we're going to cover some of that to start with. Obviously, the first thing you want to do is determine what you are really looking for. You know, set your group expectations and abilities. What kind of trip are they wanting? Are they wanting a nice leisurely trip, or are they looking for thrills and people? And then also you need to understand what are the abilities of these people. Just the age group, the good swimmers. Hopefully, not cases that are not swimmers. I would recommend avoiding the rivers which you can't swim. But you need to assess these, you know, expectations again. You know, are they looking for a fast real trip down the river, or are they looking to just a leisurely afternoon? I've floated a lot of people and do like call ourselves a sloth. You know, just take their time. So find out what people are wanting to do, and then what types of crafts are they going to be using? Canoes, kayaks, paddleboards, skis. You need to find this out first before you start deciding, you know, where you have to actually go. So, you know, once you decided, you know, what you're looking for, then you kind of stick to different river sections. Now, I know some people will be real familiar with this, because they know it may not. Rivers are typically raised in their class. Class 1 to 2 for beginners. And the majority of the rivers in this area are going to fall in that class down into for the biggest section for the river. While there are some class 3 sections in some of the rivers here in the area, the majority of these you're going to find in the 1 to 2 lanes. Now, when I talk about these classes, I'm also talking about them in normal water conditions. Obviously, when you start looking at flood conditions, really, these classes can change tremendously. So then you've got class 3 to 5, obviously, they're for experienced paddlers. And then class 6, I like to say that's for barrel raft. So that's fall. Obviously, we haven't had anything like that around here. And again, the type of experience that you're looking for. Again, you think of rafting, you know, lots of white water, canoeing, and skiing. So a little bit more about this and these classes, and then so It says most of the rivers in this area is going to fall in the class one side. So class one, you know, moving water, it's rippling, these small rocky areas where you have small roads, real obstruction, usually avoid them if you don't. If it's the cultural conditions you're looking for, you'll see where they're going to go. Class one is pretty much where having the most fun is in evening events. Somebody on a paddleboard also class one is a really good story. But you know, even if you have no matter what your water craft is, you know, class one is always going to be, you know, a lot of fun, a lot of easy areas. Class two, now we're starting to deal with obstructions and more rock. You're gonna have to do some new class one and pretty much they watch that down there, you know, so, but in the class two, you're gonna have to move some rocks and even waves. If you do end up coming out of the boat, you're probably not gonna have a problem. Both cases, class two, are not really high. People without even before, you know, you do any fall out of the boat on the roof. Well, around here, you just stand up most. There are some places you can't do that, and I'll have some examples of that in a little bit. But again, you know, this is the majority that you can see around here of these class two areas. Looking at class three, as I said, we do have a few locations in this county and the close to Dan and Smith and the Mayo that you will find a class three rapid. And he said this requires complex and easily where to work around ledges, make large waves, strong eddies. And one thing about the rivers around here, when you look at individual locations of the rapid, and oftentimes people will say, oh, the position on particular rapid is class three. But if you look at the definition of the class P, the position, if you get a lot of class P's in one location at the same time, the man you start looking at you might actually be saying it should be a three area. So many of the same thing and stop. So the class three is obviously definitely on 50 lines, do fall out if to get back up, and you may need assistance. You definitely don't have to do class three on an individual basis. You never really get into it at all individual. Then we look at class four, since we don't have anything like that around here, we don't know water. But you know, out in the western parts of the state, like in West Virginia, and you've got some areas that's really advanced. That little siren going about here. With some really dangerous conditions, you know, these are areas that you definitely want to be experienced. You want to be with people that understand where you're at. You want to have a lot of equipment. These are just types of areas for people die. And then there is, as I said, class five, which that's like a barrel ride. I mean, these are huge. These are waterfalls. Nothing obviously around here like that. But up in West Virginia, you're going to find some five. And then, excuse me, the six is the one that I call like the waterfall. These are ones that are, you know, like you're going to go over them. You're not going to just ride through them. You're actually going to fall off. Okay. So again, we're just going to basically going to be talking about twos and threes that are in this region. So, and if you picture the river that you want to go on to, you want to prepare yourself to whatever that particular river is also. Here the graphic of this gentleman here is a nice way of looking at all the different opportunities, different ways that you can dress for the river. Here's on a class 1, class 2 river, you can kind of get away with a little bit more of what's on the right-hand side of that drawing there. But obviously the more advanced the areas you're going into, the more you want to be equipped like the side on the left-hand side. And, you know, a little mixture of this is not a problem. Although I will say that I would never go on the river and barefoot. I don't care if it's class 1, 2, whatever. There's too much stuff in the rivers around here. You would always want some kind of foot protection. We look at some of the equipment here that the gentleman's wearing. You definitely want a good PFD, right? Something long lines like this, where you've got really good protection. You've got knife, you've got a whistle, you've got row bag, row rope. These are all the kinds of things that you want to have on a well-prepared trip. One thing you have to remember about the trip around here on these rivers, you're oftentimes several miles in access, and you're on your own. Oftentimes it's a cell signal. So if something happens, you've got to have whatever you need to get by at that moment. So 80% of the stuff I carry on any trip, I don't use all the time, but it's there if I need it. You know? Plan for those emergencies. You know, what's going to happen if somebody has a problem in the boat. 2 years ago, one of the people on the trip suddenly ripped a hole in the bottom of his boat, and we were not where we could get out. We had to actually get him to a point where then later we could go down to a point where we could call somebody to go and get him. So fortunately we had planned for that eventuality if for some reason we had to get out and need somebody we could call. So definitely want to think of things like this. And then obviously, because of the rivers, you're going in at one access and you're coming out somewhere else, you typically are going to have shuttle vehicles to get from point to point. Looking at a little more detail on some of the things that you want to have, I said one of the top of things you want to be at there's always there, even in slow moving water. One of the best tubing sections of the river, as far as the dam is concerned, is the section of the river below Madison, the tubing. Water is easy through there, you can use, but there can be times that you come on something a few years ago, we have a dam over here, some tubers, it's not aware of the dam, they went over the dam so that it could run. You can have lots of things. Would it have saved them? Very nice. So you always know where to be, even if you get doing helmet. If you're doing heavy, things like class 3, you probably have to have a head. Yes, sometimes I don't always work. Some of the sections, not necessarily in areas where you don't run into that possibility very often. Flow bag, a flow weight, is always a good thing to have. It's not expensive. And right here, it's easy to carry on boat. Doesn't take up a lot of space, but having that rope can be really useful. And I've had to use mine before, just to help get boats full across the river. You got tornadoes. So something has obviously sun protection, hat, sunglasses. You go on the river. In many cases, you can spend the whole time in the sun. So water shoes, as I said, definitely want to have water. I would never get into it up to you with sometimes that the foot section. First aid kits always have dry bags. Obviously, road safety plans you can have. hatch pit, duct tape, that Burgess, friend of mine, that had that incident. With his boats, he normally doesn't go anywhere without having, a roll of duct tape. So we did actually have duct tape, we could have taped the bottom of the boat and just been able to keep going. So, wetsuits, fly suits, and everything. All this is kind of going to depend on the river conditions. The rivers here in the county, we have those cold rivers and warm rivers, and rivers is for the most part of warmer rivers. The Smith River, particularly in the upper reaches of the Smith River in Virginia, close to the Chillicothe Dam, to those very cold rivers. Sections of that river that never gets above 55 degrees year round. It is cold if you get in that water and not staying there for a while. So, rest of the conditions. Navigation, hopefully you're not going on there at night, but you never know, something may come up. So you want to head on, or you want to light. You technically required, by the rules of water that, you need not only a PFD, but you're supposed to have a sounding device. There's no people use a whistle. And then you're supposed to have a light signaling device. So, and then obviously snacks. So you need with now there are some common hand treatment that are used. Let me put this up here so our people aren't aware of this, but when you're paddling, you can't always hear people. There's really was making noise and separated by a little bit of distance. So these are just some common hand signals that use to signal share the people's information. So what I have here is a little shot of the region here going out to the Dan River and the Mayo and the Smith. And the Dan River is highlighted to 90 miles. That's approximately 90 miles there from Virginia line, State County to the Virginia line here in Washington County. And the Dan River is a really good example of all the different types of conditions you're going to find in this region. Pretty much, if you look at the map and notice from the green dot at the left, where it comes into the Virginia line, from that area down to Danbury, a very unique section of the river, and that it has similarities to what you would find in the Mayo and the Smith. This area has a lot of class ones, a lot of class twos. And the thing that's challenging about that upper section of the dam is watch the water levels. It's a very small section of river. I've got a little video we'll look at here in a minute that shows you if you've never seen that section of the river. You can see it's quite narrow, but it has a lot of drift in it. A lot of rock. There's very little being able to just paddle in one direction. You're constantly having to move, you're moving around obstructions in the river. While all these rapids are typically not flashed over two, there's 1, 3 there that depending on the water level. But they're mostly considered twos, but they're continuous twos. I mean, you will go half a mile continuous rapid. So you're constantly moving, you're constantly turning. So that section of the river is, like I say, very typical of what you would see on Mayo, particularly upper sections of Mayo and the Smith, upper sections of the Smith. Now from Danbury to Madison, that section of the river flows down a lot. It's still some good little rapids in there, too, but it's definitely a lot different than what you see in that area from Danbury north. There's good areas in there with tubing activity done. I wouldn't recommend a lot of tubing on that section of the river from the Virginia line down to Danville. Now I know there's gonna be people that say, oh, I live in Key line, and I know people do like Key line. That's a pretty rough section of Cuban if you're just looking for a nice leisurely ride. Danbury to Madison, much more likely to you find a lot of Cubans in that area. There's some good places, but it slows down a lot just a lot wider. The Madison, Eden on down to the state line again, you'll get very wide, slows down a whole lot more. Again, you couple of class twos in there, but for the most part, it's a very lazy river. Very easy to see. Not a whole there in that section of the river, but again, it's a very enjoyable section of the river. Until you get down to the dam that's in Eden, the old Butte Power Dam, which is obviously an issue there. That it's a very easy river to navigate on. Now that said, because it does slow down, expect the paddling. The upper section, state line of Danbury, you can move on pretty quick and you just paddle to keep yourself and get turned around and it is gonna move you on down. Once you get past Madison, you're gonna be paddling. So be aware of that. Particularly if you're cheating. You're gonna move a lot in this town where people have gotten on to do cheating and they've underestimated the amount of time it's gonna take them to get really in and get out. And they found themselves at the dark. It's not a good thing. So be aware that there's a difference between floating and paddling. As I said, as far as the Smith and Mayo, I've got one example I'll show you is a section on the Smith that has a decent little class 3, big class B, small class 3 that I'll show you in a little bit. But the Smith and the Mayo are more similar than you can find on the northern end of the Dan River. There's on the state line in Danbury, pretty much between the state line and Madison. That's very typical that you can find on the Smith and the Mayo River. Well, I said I would show you some examples because this is one of the things about being able to plan for a really good. You know, sometimes people have never been on a section of the river and are not really sure what to expect. So this is a video here of a section, a little short section of the river between Danbury and State Line. As you can see, the river is not very wide. And you can see in the head here, there's a lot of boulders. Start the video. So you see what I was talking about. You have to just stay in a straight line here. You're trying to avoid obstacles, lots of obstructions there, lots of rock. And if you notice at this point here, as you're coming up, it looks like the whole river is blocked. All right, well, it just about is. The river has got one little narrow spot that you got to shoot through. So, as you can see, this is why I say this wouldn't be a very good section, in my opinion, to ride a tube on. You're going to be bounced around a whole lot, and you probably end up having to get up and get on your feet. It's going to be tough in this water. This particular day, a couple of years ago, I went back and looked to see what the level was and the flow. It was only about 300 cubic feet per second. And you see, not a really high rate compared to what some of these rivers around here can get to. The level that particular day is gauged, which is up rivers and the location, excuse me, down rivers and the location which is taken at, is about 1.7 feet. So when you see that and you go, oh, the river is less than 2 feet, that's no problem. Yeah, you can stand up. But as you can see here, there's a lot of water moving through this area in a very tight space. So you have to shoot through here. This is a nice little rapid that, depending on the water, can get extremely dangerous. Imagine if the water here was 3 feet or 4 feet. We're looking at a much more dangerous rapid. but beautiful. Got the right equipment, 30 years, got no problem. And my buddy's getting through there. This next video is taken between Danbury and Madison on a section of the river. As you can see, the river has gotten much wider, not as many riffles, and bigger rocks, as you can see there. So here's a section you can easily avoid some obstruction. If you were tubing or on a paddle board, you can avoid most of the problems. You notice the speed of the river has slowed down a lot compared to what it was further up. So again, be aware of that when you're keeping your time on a trip. So what you're seeing here is very typical of everything you would see between Danbury and Madison area. They're a little bit wider, paddling a little bit more. As you'll see here in just a second, it can quickly change, and then you will come into the section of where you'll have a few rapids that you'll have to maneuver around. That for the most part, you can see it right flat. You can even see the bottom if you look there. So yeah, I could have gotten out of the boat and stood up right there without much trouble. But as I said, there are some ledges in this section that picks up. Again, even on a few, this would be a fun little section of boat. Now, that said, one thing to remember again about planning a trip is how much distance is it between where you're getting on and where you're getting off. So, again, with tubes, you're not paddling, you're just riding along with the river. And the river at this point here is probably doing about 3 miles an hour. But remember that a tube, you cannot float real fast. But again, as you can see, there is some a little fun section even on this part of it. Now, this video is taken between Madison and Eden. And here you will see the river almost in a way looks like a lake. And you can see if you look over to one side, you can see some movement of water, but you can see it's slowed down tremendously. It's gotten much wider, very shallow, it's a sandy bottom. Lots of debris on the side of the river, in this area, because that's what gets deposited down. So usually the concern on these sections of the river is frontage, trees and things that for a long that have been piled up around the river. But the water in these areas right here is probably moving back to 2 miles. Very user friendly. But again, remember the time. Now, I want to put this in. This is the dam at the top. Because the sections of the river coming down in the Eden are very flat, with great defeating, but here is why you don't use fast because both landing the gangland comes with wildlife access and up in the first place. Why you don't use past that is because this is the dam that you have. This is the low head dam. And it's maybe 8 feet the height of the dam. But as you can see, this is the danger of the dam. If they are really down there, we pull around the dam, which is video, and you see this debris that has gotten trapped. And we were there probably for 30 minutes. And that piece that you see floating over there only got there and it's there and we left. All I know is field of it. So this is the location where those individuals died several years ago. They got trapped in the. If you notice, trees here, that section about 5 feet in front of the dam. If you look closely, you can see it's actually higher than right in front of the dam. The upwelling of the water. This is what gets people from at the base of the dam. There is a portage for the dam. So kayakers and boaters can get and go around the dam. But obviously, this is not a section that heaters need to be anywhere near. Now, I do have one video I want to show you here of the Smith River. This is one of the fast rated big class 2, small class 3, depending on the water level, called Everest Falls. Now, this particular day, me and a friend of mine decided to do the river. It had been much higher the week before, and the water had started to come down, not kind of quite muddy. But I'm paddling up to the edge of what's called the falls. If you look ahead, you can actually see the drop off of the river. How much lower it gets on the other side. This particular day, I look back at the record, the water was flowing at about 750 cubic feet per second. The river level was about 3 feet above now. So this is what I would call a high water day. Definitely not day you want to get in a huge. But we had a kayak and we wanted to see what the conditions were this particular day. But even at that, you'll notice that with the park equipment, I'm able to paddle up, I'm able to paddle down, I can avoid, I can pick my area where I want to go into. So that in a second, as you go in, you'll see just how much it dropped off here. In fact, the camera's gonna take a hit and get turned up before I turn it back down. Now, when I get to the lower tunnel, I'm turning around to wait for my buddy to come through. Because one thing you always want to do when you have rapids like this is take your time, one at a time, go through. Somebody gets through, right up to the next person, so you never know what's going to happen as you're going to see here. You look back behind the rock here in a second, you'll see his paddle flash up. He's paddling up to the cut. And then if you look closely, there is his boat. Upside down. So he got turned over, he's behind it. But as you see, once he got through the rapid a little bit, he was able to stand up. But the water over the end of that rapid is over your head. So this is why even on sections of the river that we typically, look at as not being particularly dangerous at times, and in certain places, it is extremely dangerous. So you always want to be prepared. Now, this last little video I'm going to show you here is again up on the upper section of the dam. This is up above Dam Dam. And I want to show you this video because I think it illustrates very well the power of the river. Now, again, this is the water this particular day was not abnormally high. It's about 1.7 feet, 300 cubic feet per second. But I have video, and I decided I want to get some video of my buddy going through ahead of me through the little rapid that we were moving through. As I said, when you want to go through these things one at a time. And the mistake I made here was I wasn't going through one at a time, but I got too close. I want to make sure I got good video, that I actually should have given myself a little bit more space behind it. So what happens here in just a second, he hits a rock and gets stopped dead. And I don't have time with this point here, I had to turn, but the front of my boat ends up hitting the front of his boat and riding up into the air. And then, boom, I'm in the water. Now, as you can see, it's not deep water. And then I was immediately able to stand up. But the force of the water was so strong, it pinned my boat to the rock. Well, not my buddy off, so you can see him now moving on, but now my boat has gotten pinned on a rock. And I can't pull it off at this point. It's got so much water in it, and the force of the water is pushing so hard, I can't get the boat pulled loose from the back of the rock. So fortunately, my buddy was able to paddle up to me and take my paddle or the boat from getting any worse than it was. But what I'm illustrating here is how much force even a small amount of water can exert. So this whole video I've actually edited a little bit. I was stuck here for almost 10 minutes before we were able to get the boat out. It was stuck so hard I could not with all my might pull it off. As you can see here, I'm trying to pull it. The boat's trying to get it from off the rock. It actually got to the point where it started to bend the boat a little bit. So I got a little smart and I decided instead of trying to pull it off, I would see if I could turn it over. And that was what allowed me to finally get this boat off of this rock, because I rolled it around enough with the water to dump out and pull it back. Now, imagine if I had been on my own, all my stuff, some of the stuff that fell out of my boat, which my buddies were able to get that was downstream, I would have lost all of that. I would have been stuck here for a while. And like I said, I only got the boat turned over. And even at that, as you can see, how much trouble my friend was having just to stand up in the water. And yes, not very deep. I was in flood stage. It's been on pretty much in the water in this section of the river. Usually for the broken ankle or whatever, it's not the best river to be trying to walk around. It's one another reason I would not recommend tubing on this section of the river. So finally, after all, I said almost 10 minutes, we were ready to get the boat over to the shore and then get dumped out. And by the way, in the 50s right there. Yeah. So that's pretty much what I have prepared there. Some examples of what to see on the rivers around here. As I said, these pairs, they're beautiful rivers. You know, if you've never seen those upper sections go down, upper sections of Smith and it's gorgeous. I mean, it's well worth the effort to get up there and see it. But these potatoes, remember, you know, it is not an amusement ride. You can get hurt. You can join. So, these potatoes. Now, I don't know if you had any questions or anything. On, so you're back on.
Yeah. Well, I don't see any questions, but if y'all have any, drop them in the chat. Keith, I'll add to what you said. We have a Be Safe Outdoors link on our page. So if you have any questions about some of the stuff that Keith wrote about or talked about today, there's more information on that part of the website. We're always updating it. So
Visitors guide, I mean, our Blue Wave guides.
yeah, definitely. You can check out the Roco Blueway Guides, Smith River Blueway Guides. If you would like a full map of the entire Dan River or the Smith River, we have special Dan River and Smith River guides. Keith, do you have one beside you that are for sale? Yeah. And those are semi-waterproof. So those are on our website and you can get them shipped to you. So they're pretty awesome and have a lot of great information about the historic relevance and the natural importance of our river, along with mile markers and information about where to get it on and off the river. So, well, if we don't have any more questions, Keith, thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much for all your knowledge. It takes a long time to get all that information together, and you being, a native paddler to this area, we really appreciate that. Yeah.
Hey, everything I learned having fun.
Yeah. Well, and exactly, like we appreciate that. And Keith, before he was a recreation assistant with us, was a full, we called it a super volunteer. So we appreciate his work, and he still, fulfills his super volunteer role on the First Saturday Outing Task Force. So, Keith, do you want to talk about our next First Saturday outing?
Yeah, our upcoming first Saturday outing is June 7th. It's on a section of the river in Stokes County, from North Hop to Pitcher Road. That's the section below Danbury. So that's in that kind of middle area where you got some real exciting areas, but you don't, a little wider. You got some um, easier places to get through, but still some interesting things. So we're doing that in conjunction with the Mountain Hanson Services. So we expect a good turnout. So come out there and enjoy the river. Hopefully we'll have a good.
Yeah, definitely. And another plug, we're doing kayak safety classes this summer with Get Outdoors. In Greensboro, we're going all around the Dan River Basin Association. Or the Dan River Basin, and we had our first one at Hanging Rock State Park. Our next one will be at Lake Reedsville in Reedsville, North Carolina. We'll have one at Person and Mayo Lake, Hyco, and Farmer Lake. So y'all come out and take a peek. It's linked on our website. So all of this information, we hope to see you all there. And yay, thanks, Susan. She said, I'll be at Lake Reedsville. Great. Well, this is a great primer for that event. So thank you all so much for being here. And I hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday and have a good Memorial Day.
All right.
Thank you.